Gunfire cracked through the rain-soaked alley behind Myeongdong's night market, and Adiz froze mid-step, her heart slamming against her ribs. Glass shattered somewhere close. A man in a black coat shoved her against the wall, his body a wall of muscle shielding hers from the chaos exploding around them. She stared up into storm-gray eyes that burned with fury and something else, something that made her forget the danger for one impossible second. He smelled like rain and cedar and controlled violence. His hand cradled the back of her head, protecting her from the concrete as another shot rang out. "Don't move," he growled, voice low and commanding, and something inside him, something long buried under years of blood and power, cracked open at the feel of her trembling breath against his throat. Neither of them knew it yet, but their worlds had just collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. Welcome to Afro Soul Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe. Adiz Chukwu had come to Seoul 3 years ago with nothing but a culinary scholarship and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated by a city that swallowed foreigners whole. She'd built a small but devoted following for her fusion restaurant, blending Nigerian spice with Korean technique, and tonight she'd simply wanted to close early and walk home through the market for ingredients. She hadn't expected to walk into a war. The man who'd pinned her against that wall was Kang Min-ho, and by morning, every rumor she'd ever heard about him would prove true and insufficient at once. The next day, flowers arrived at her restaurant. No card, no name, just white orchids, arranged with a precision that felt deliberate, almost possessive. Adiz stared at them for a long moment before tossing the delivery slip aside, telling herself it meant nothing. It meant everything. Later that night, a black sedan idled outside her restaurant long after closing. Min-ho sat in the back seat, watching the light in her window through the rain-streaked glass, his jaw tight. He told himself he was only confirming she'd made it home safely. He told himself a lot of things that week that weren't entirely true. A few days later, she saw him again, this time in daylight, unmistakable. He walked into her restaurant in a charcoal suit that made the room go quiet, flanked by 2 men who stood like sentries at the door. Every head turned. Everyone in Seoul knew the name Kang Min-ho, CEO of Kang Construction on paper, something far darker beneath it, a man who controlled half the city's underworld with nothing more than a look. "The woman from the alley," he said, not a question. "The man who almost got me killed," she shot back, arms crossed, refusing to let her voice shake. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe, or admiration. Few people spoke to him that way. Fewer still lived comfortably afterward. "I saved your life," he corrected quietly. The reason it needed saving. He didn't argue. He simply studied her, the fire in her eyes, the way she stood her ground despite every instinct that should have told her to run, and something inside his chest, something he'd locked away since childhood, stirred awake. By the end of the week, he was a fixture at her restaurant. He never announced himself. He simply appeared, always at the corner table, always watching her move through the kitchen with quiet intensity. His men whispered that they'd never seen him linger anywhere longer than necessary. Adiz pretended not to notice the way her pulse quickened whenever the bell above her door announced his arrival. "You don't have to keep coming here," she told him one evening, setting down a plate of jollof-glazed short ribs she hadn't meant to make so carefully. "I know," he said simply, and that was all the explanation he offered. The following morning, a rival restaurateur named Daniel Osei, smooth-talking, well-connected, and utterly unaware of the danger he courted, began dropping by with exaggerated compliments and lingering touches on Adiz's arm. He fancied himself charming. Min-ho, watching from his corner table, felt something cold and possessive coil in his chest. "He's flirting with you," Min-ho said flatly when Daniel finally left. "Jealous?" Adiz teased, though her heartbeat betrayed her. Min-ho's jaw ticked. "I don't get jealous." But that night, Daniel received a quiet visit from 2 men in dark suits who suggested, with chilling politeness, that he find another restaurant to frequent. He never returned. Adiz noticed. She said nothing, but the knowledge that he'd done it protected her without asking, without expecting thanks, settled somewhere deep and warm inside her. That evening, Min-ho waited for her outside as she locked up. Rain misted the streetlights gold. "Walk with me," he said, and for once it wasn't a command but something closer to a request. They walked in silence through the wet streets, past shuttered shops and the distant hum of the city. "Why do you keep coming back?" she finally asked. "You're a powerful man." "You could have anyone. Why waste your time on a foreign chef who insults you to your face?" Min-ho stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, the careful mask he wore for the world slipped away entirely. "Because you're the only person in this city who looks at me and sees a man, not a name people fear." His voice roughened. "Because since that night in the alley, I haven't been able to think about anything but keeping you safe, and I don't know what to do with that." Adi's breath caught. Rain traced silver lines down his face, softening the sharp edges of a man the whole city trembled before. "That's dangerous," she whispered. "Wanting someone like you." "I know," he said, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I want you anyway." A few days later, tension in the underworld began tightening around him. Rumors surfaced. A rival syndicate, the Beak family, had noticed his frequent visits to a small restaurant in the market district and noticed the woman who ran it. They saw weakness where Min-ho saw the first true happiness he'd known in years. Whispers reached him through his network. They were watching her. He doubled her security without telling her, positioning men she never noticed at the edges of her daily life. He told himself it was simply prudent. He knew in the quiet hours of the night, it was because the thought of anything happening to her made something violent and desperate rise in his chest. That evening, he showed up at her restaurant after closing, tension radiating off him in waves. "You need to be more careful," he said, voice tight. "Careful of what?" Adiz frowned, wiping down the counter. "Min-ho, you're scaring me." He hesitated, a rare thing for him, before admitting, "People know I care about you. In my world, that makes you a target." The confession cost him something visible. A crack in the armor he'd worn his entire adult life. "I should stay away from you. It would be safer." Adiz set down her cloth, walking toward him with a boldness that surprised them both. "Do you want to stay away from me?" "No." The word tore out of him, raw and unguarded. "God help me, no." Following night, a storm rolled through Seoul, thunder cracking against the windows of her small apartment above the restaurant. Min-ho had insisted on staying, positioned outside like a silent guardian, until she'd finally pulled him inside out of the rain, unable to bear the thought of him standing alone in the storm because of her. They sat across from each other in the dim apartment, lightning flashing intermittently through the curtains, the air between them thick with everything neither had said aloud. "Tell me about you," she said softly. "Not the boss everyone fears. You." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Min-ho did. He told her about a childhood stripped of softness, a father who ruled through fear, a mother who disappeared when he was 12, and the slow, brutal education that taught him power was the only language that kept a person safe. He told her he'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to tear them down, until an alley, gunfire, and a stranger's trembling breath against his throat. "I don't know how to be gentle," he admitted, voice barely above the storm outside. "I don't know how to love someone without wanting to own every part of them, protect every part of them until it terrifies you." Adiz reached across the space between them, her fingers brushing his jaw, guiding his eyes to hers. "Maybe I don't need gentle," she whispered. "Maybe I just need you to be honest." Air shifted. Thunder rolled low and distant. Min-ho's hand rose to cover hers against his face, and the careful restraint he'd held for weeks finally, quietly broke. Adiz. Her name left him like a confession, like a vow. "I need you to know that whatever this is, it isn't temporary, not for me. I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling, "of what it would mean to belong to a man like you." "Then let me show you," he murmured, closing the last distance between them. "That belonging to me isn't a cage, it's a promise." Their lips met, hesitant at first, then deepening into something neither could have stopped even if the storm had torn the roof from above them. His hands framed her face like she was something precious and impossibly fragile, and she melted into him, years of careful walls dissolving between them both. The rain hammered against the windows as the world outside fell away entirely, leaving only warmth, breathless closeness, and a longing that had been building since the night gunfire first brought them together. What happened next stayed between them, a quiet unraveling of guarded hearts, of trembling hands and whispered names, tenderness meeting desperate need in the candlelit dark, until dawn crept over Seoul and found them tangled together, changed. But when Adiz woke, sunlight spilling gold across the empty pillow beside her, panic seized her chest. Min-ho was gone. Adiz sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where Min-ho had been hours before. The sheets were cold. No note, no message, nothing but silence pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Every insecurity she'd buried since that first storm-soaked confession came rushing back at once. He got what he wanted, and now he's gone. just like everyone said he would be. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she'd known better than to fall for a man like him. But her hands shook as she dressed, and by the time she reached the restaurant downstairs, tears blurred the edges of her vision. Later that morning, one of her staff mentioned a black sedan had been parked outside since dawn. Adiz refused to look. She threw herself into prep work, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, refusing to acknowledge the ache spreading through her chest. A few hours later, Minho walked through the door, and the relief that flooded her before she could stop it terrified her more than his absence had. "Where were you?" she demanded, voice sharper than she intended. His expression was drawn, exhausted in a way she'd never seen. "There was an emergency. One of my men was attacked before dawn. The Beek family made their first move." His jaw tightened. "I left before you woke because I didn't want you anywhere near what I had to handle. I've been outside since 6, making sure no one comes near this building." Adiz's anger faltered. "You didn't leave because of last night?" Minho crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her face in both hands with a tenderness that contradicted everything the city believed about him. "Last night changed everything for me," he said fiercely. "I would burn down every enemy I have before I let you think for 1 second that it meant nothing." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Never doubt that again." Relief and vulnerability crashed through her simultaneously, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing him in, letting herself believe, just for a moment, that this could be safe. It wouldn't stay that way for long. That evening, Minho's second-in-command, Taeyong, arrived with grim news. The Beek family had identified Adiz specifically, understanding that hurting her was the surest way to hurt Minho. Surveillance photos of her restaurant, her apartment, her daily routes through the market, all of it had surfaced in Beek territory. "We move her to the penthouse," Minho said without hesitation, voice cold with command. "Absolutely not," Adiz cut in. "This is my restaurant, my life. I won't be hidden away because of your enemies." "They will use you against me," Minho said, low and urgent, crouching before her chair to meet her eyes directly. "Adiz, I have buried men who made the mistake of being careless with someone they loved. I refuse to bury you." The word loved hung between them, unplanned, undeniable. Adiz's breath caught. Minho didn't retract it. "Love you," he said again, deliberately this time, his hands finding hers. "I have loved you since an alley and gunfire gave me no choice but to hold you against a wall and realize I would tear the world apart before I let anything touch you. Please, let me protect you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, and that night she moved into the top floor of Kang Tower, a fortress of glass and steel that suddenly felt less like a prison and more like the safest place in Seoul, simply because he was there. By the end of the week, an uneasy rhythm settled between them. Mornings tangled in soft sheets and quiet laughter. Evenings spent with Minho's security briefings audible through the penthouse walls, reminders that danger still circled them both. Adiz learned the small, unguarded parts of him few ever saw. The way he hummed old trot songs while making coffee, the surprising gentleness in his hands when he braided a strand of her hair back from her face, the way his eyes softened only for her. But peace in their world never lasted. One evening, while Minho attended an emergency meeting downtown, Adiz slipped out against every instruction, desperate for fresh air and the illusion of normalcy after days confined to glass walls. She told herself a short walk to the corner market was harmless. She was wrong. A dark van pulled alongside her before she'd gone 3 blocks. Rough hands seized her, a cloth pressed over her mouth, and the last thing she registered before darkness swallowed her was the taste of chemical sweetness and pure, blinding terror. When Minho received the call, her phone abandoned on the sidewalk, security footage showing the van's plate scratched deliberately illegible, something inside him went terrifyingly, dangerously still. "Find her," he said, voice a low, lethal calm that made even his most hardened men flinch. "Burn every safe house the Beek family owns if you have to. I want her found before sunrise." City that had feared Kang Minho for years was about to learn precisely why. He tore through Seoul's underworld with ruthless, surgical precision. Informants dragged from bars, warehouses raided, alliances called in that he'd spent a decade cultivating for exactly this kind of emergency. Every minute without word from his men felt like a blade twisting deeper into his chest. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He stood at the war table in Kang Tower, jaw locked, eyes burning, refusing to consider the possibility that he might be too late. She has to be alive, he told himself again and again. I haven't told her enough. I haven't shown her enough. I can't lose her before she knows exactly how much she's changed me. Meanwhile, Adiz woke in a dim concrete room, wrists bound, head throbbing from the sedative. A man she didn't recognize watched her from a metal chair across the room, phone in hand, clearly waiting for orders. The chef, he said, almost amused. The one who made Kang Min-ho stupid enough to fall in love. Adiz lifted her chin despite the fear coursing through her. He'll come for me. That's the idea, the man said coolly. We're counting on it. Terror threatened to swallow her, but beneath it, something steadier took root, the memory of storm gray eyes, of a vow whispered against her lips. Belonging to me isn't a cage, it's a promise. She held onto that promise now like a lifeline in the dark. Hours bled together. She strained against her restraints, searching the room for any weakness, any opportunity. When the guard stepped out briefly to take a call, she managed to work one wrist partially free, heart hammering with fragile, desperate hope. Back at Kang Tower, a break finally came near midnight. A captured Beak lieutenant, terrified enough of Min-ho's reputation to talk. An abandoned printing warehouse near the industrial docks. Min-ho was moving before the man finished the sentence, a small army of men falling into formation behind him, every one of them understanding that tonight was not a night for restraint. The warehouse loomed ahead, half-lit and silent, guards positioned at every visible entrance. Min-ho's hands, usually so composed, trembled faintly with barely contained fury as he issued final orders. Whatever it takes. Gunfire erupted the moment his men breached the perimeter, sharp, chaotic, deafening in the enclosed dark. Min-ho moved through it like a man possessed. Every ounce of the calculated calm he showed the boardroom abandoned entirely, replaced by something primal and unstoppable. Enemies who might once have given him pause fell before him, and still, all he could think was her name, over and over, a desperate prayer disguised as forward motion. He found the concrete room at the back of the warehouse, door hanging half off its hinges from his men's assault moments earlier. And there she was, bruised, exhausted, wrist bloodied from working herself free, but alive, achingly, impossibly alive. Adiz, he breathed, crossing the room in a heartbeat, gathering her against his chest with a desperation that shook through his entire body. You came, she whispered against him, tears finally breaking free now that the danger had passed. I will always come for you, he said fiercely, cradling her face, pressing his forehead to hers. Always, do you understand me? There is no version of this world where I let you go. But even as relief washed over them both, a new danger stirred in the shadows behind them. A figure stepping from the warehouse's far entrance, gun raised, the true architect of the Beak family's attack finally revealing himself, ready to make sure Kang Min-ho paid the ultimate price for daring to love someone the underworld had marked for death. Time seemed to slow as the gunman stepped fully into the light, an older man with cold, calculating eyes, flanked by two more shooters emerging from the shadows behind him. Min-ho recognized him instantly. Beak Sung-min, head of the rival syndicate, a man who'd waited years for an opening this precise. Kang Min-ho, Beak said, almost pleasant, gun-trained, steady on them both. The great untouchable boss brought to his knees by a woman. Poetic, really. Min-ho shifted instinctively, placing his body fully between Adiz and the weapon, his own gun already raised, steady despite the fury coursing through him. Walk away now and you keep breathing, he said, voice deadly quiet. That's the only offer you're getting. You're not exactly positioned to negotiate, Beak countered, though his eyes flicked briefly toward the warehouse entrance, where the sound of Min-ho's men clearing the last resistance echoed closer. Doubt flickered across his face for the first time. Adiz felt Min-ho's body tense beside her, calculating, and in the fraction of a second before Beak's finger tightened on the trigger, Min-ho moved, shoving her hard behind a concrete pillar as gunfire cracked through the warehouse. Pain seared across his shoulder, but he returned fire without hesitation, years of controlled precision guiding his hand even through the burning adrenaline. Beak's men fell first. Beak himself stumbled backward, weapon clattering from his grip, as Min-ho's shot found its mark, and within seconds Ti-yong and the rest of Min-ho's men flooded the room, securing what remained of the threat with brutal efficiency. Silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens Min-ho had arranged himself, ensuring the authorities cleaned up only what he needed them to see. Minho. Adiz scrambled from behind the pillar the moment the danger passed, horror flooding her at the blood soaking through his shirt. "You're hit!" "It's nothing," he said, though his face had gone pale, adrenaline the only thing keeping him upright. "Adiz, look at me. Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm fine," she insisted, tears streaming freely now as she pressed trembling hands against his wound. "You saved me, again. You keep saving me, and you never let me save you back." Something in his exhausted, blood-streaked face softened despite the pain. "You already have," he murmured. "Every day since that alley, you've been saving me from a life with no reason to keep fighting." By the following morning, Minho lay recovering in a private hospital wing, shoulder bandaged, Adiz refusing to leave his bedside despite his gentle insistence that she rest. The Beek family's remaining leadership, stripped of their figurehead and facing the full weight of Minho's retaliation, sent formal word of surrender within hours. A rare, absolute victory that rippled through Seoul's underworld as confirmation of exactly how far Kang Minho would go for the woman now curled asleep in the chair beside his bed. A few days later, once he'd healed enough to stand without wincing, Minho did something he'd never once done in his adult life. He called a press conference. Reporters packed the room, murmuring speculation about Kang Construction's next expansion, unaware of what was actually coming. Minho stepped to the podium, Adiz standing just off to the side, bewildered by his sudden insistence she come along. "I didn't call you here to discuss business," Minho said, voice carrying easily across the stunned room. His eyes found Adiz, and something in his expression shifted from CEO to simply a man, unguarded, certain. "I called you here because I want the record set straight. Rumors have circulated about my private life for years, assumptions about who I am, what I'm capable of feeling. I'm done letting silence answer for me." He extended a hand toward her, and though her heart pounded, Adiz crossed the room to take it, the flash of cameras erupting around them. "This is Adiz Chukwu," he said, voice thick with an emotion the city had never once heard from him. "She is the reason I remember what it means to be human. I love her completely, without apology, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it, starting today." Before the stunned room, before the cameras that would broadcast the moment across every screen in Seoul by nightfall, Minho dropped to one knee, producing a ring that caught the light like captured starlight. "Adiz," he said, voice rough with everything he'd never learned to say gently until she taught him how. "You walked into my life through gunfire and chaos, and somehow you became the only peace I've ever known. I don't know how to be soft with anyone else. I only know how to be soft with you. Marry me. Let the whole world see exactly what you mean to me." Tears spilled freely down Adiz's face as she nodded, unable to speak past the overwhelming rush of joy, gathering him close the moment he rose to slide the ring onto her trembling hand. The room erupted in applause, cameras capturing what would become the most talked-about headline in Seoul for weeks: the untouchable boss, brought fully, unashamedly to his knees by love. That evening, back at the penthouse, storm clouds long since cleared from the Seoul skyline, Minho pulled her close against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. "No more secrets," he murmured against her hair. "No more hiding what we are. Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," she echoed softly, the words settling into her chest like a promise finally kept. By the following spring, their wedding filled Kang Tower's grand hall with more warmth and color than its cold glass walls had ever held Nigerian drumming woven seamlessly through traditional Korean ceremony. Adiz's family flown in for the occasion, standing proudly beside Minho's small circle of loyal, hardened men who wept unashamedly at the sight of their boss finally, completely at peace. Adiz wore ivory lace-edged with intricate ankara patterns, and when Minho lifted her veil, the look in his eyes held none of the calculated control the world knew him for, only pure, undisguised devotion. "I told you," he whispered against her lips just before the officiant called them husband and wife. "Belonging to me was never a cage." "It's a promise," she finished, smiling through happy tears. "I remember." Months later, on a quiet morning filled with golden autumn light spilling across their penthouse, Adiz pressed Minho's hand gently against her stomach. Watching the exact moment realization dawned across his face, shock giving way to disbelief, disbelief melting into an emotion so raw and overwhelming it stole the breath from his chest entirely. His voice broke. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, laughing through her own tears at the sight of Seoul's most feared, most powerful man dropping to his knees before her, pressing reverent kisses against her stomach as though it were the most precious thing he'd ever guarded. "I will protect this family," he vowed fiercely, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears, "with everything I am for the rest of my life." And as autumn light filled their home, wrapping around the family they'd fought so fiercely to build, Adiz knew without a single doubt that every alley, every storm, every danger they'd survived had led them exactly here, to a love strong enough to conquer trauma, danger, and fear, and build something unbreakable in its place.